On a quiet street in the heart of downtown, a patrol car pulls up to the curb. Two officers step out, exchanging a glance as their radios crackle with vague details about a potential suspect. Their eyes lock onto a woman standing alone, adjusting the hem of her skirt as she looks at her phone. She seems ordinary, unassuming, but something about her posture catches their attention. Without hesitation, they approach, their boots clicking against the pavement with a certainty that only authority can convey. One officer leans in closer, his voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, we need a word with you." She barely looks up, her fingers still scrawling, unfazed by the looming figures. The second officer takes a step forward, his hand brushing the edge of her skirt as he motions for her to comply. But then it happens. A slight movement, a glimpse of something clipped to her waistband. The shine of a badge. Not just any badge. 3 bold letters. FBI. The air shifts. Confusion flashes across the officers' faces. Their assured presence falters as the woman finally meets their gaze, her voice cutting through the tension. "Do you even know who you're dealing with?" What began as a simple check spirals into a revelation no one saw coming, a moment where power dynamics flip in an instant and assumptions crumble under the weight of reality. This is not a story about routine policing. It's about the cost of hasty judgments and the shock of uncovering a truth far bigger than anyone expected. Stay with us, because what happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about appearances and authority. Every story has a beginning, and this one starts in 2 distinct places, separated by years but bound by the same thread of mistaken identity. Let's go back to Rochester, New York in 2019. It was an unremarkable evening for Adder Mogendahl, an EMT who had just finished a shift saving lives. The weight of the day clung to him as he walked through his neighborhood, his mind on nothing more than getting home to rest. He didn't know it yet, but this walk would change the course of his life. A police cruiser slowed to a crawl behind him, its headlights bathing the sidewalk in harsh white. Inside, the officers had received a call about a suspect, a black man, mid-30s, wearing dark clothing, supposedly seen in the area. To them, Mogendahl fit the description. They stepped out, their hands resting casually on their holsters, and called out to him. He turned, confused but compliant. They asked for his ID. He explained he was an EMT, showed them his work badge, and tried to reason with them. But reasoning wasn't part of the equation that night. Before he could process what was happening, Mogendahl found himself in handcuffs, accused of crimes he knew nothing about. The scene grew tense. Passers-by slowed their steps, their curiosity piqued by the sight of yet another black man detained in a city grappling with issues of systemic bias. Mogendahl's protests fell on deaf ears until the officers eventually ran his identification and discovered their mistake. He was released with a curt apology, but the damage was done. A man who spent his days saving lives was now left to grapple with the humiliation of being falsely accused. Fast forward 5 years to the bustling halls of Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. Among the throngs of travelers moving through security was Clifford Harris Jr., better known to the world as rapper and actor T.I. Known for his sharp wit and commanding presence, he was used to turning heads. But that day was different. As he approached the gate, 2 airport police officers intercepted him. They asked him to step aside for questioning. Ever the professional, complied without hesitation, but as the minutes dragged on, it became clear this wasn't a routine check. The officers explained they had a warrant for a man named Clifford Harris, wanted for a series of crimes across state lines. T.I. tried to explain it was a case of mistaken identity. After all, how many Clifford Harrises could there be? But the system didn't care about nuance. He was escorted to a holding area in full view of passengers, his celebrity status offering no protection from the assumptions made that day. It wasn't until his attorney intervened, providing clear evidence that he was not the man they were looking for, that he was released. The incident, however, left a mark, not just on him, but on those who witnessed it. 2 different men, 2 different lives, but the same underlying question. How can appearances and assumptions lead to such profound mistakes? In both cases, the settings amplified the tension. Mokdal's quiet neighborhood and T.I.'s busy airport terminal couldn't have been more different, yet both became the backdrop for moments where power and prejudice intersected. Mokdal's story was a quiet personal humiliation. T.I.'s was a public spectacle, broadcast in real time as travelers whispered and reporters caught wind of the unfolding drama. But in both cases, the same reality emerged: authority figures making snap judgments, the weight of those decisions falling squarely on the shoulders of those misidentified. What led to these encounters? How did the lives of those involved change in the aftermath? And most importantly, what can these incidents teach us about the fragile line between vigilance and bias? As we delve deeper into these stories, the answers may surprise you, but one thing is certain: these moments are more than just misunderstandings. They're reflections of a broader issue that demands attention. Moments of realization often carry a weight that lingers far beyond the event itself. For Adder Mogdal, that moment came as the police officers holding him finally acknowledged their mistake. Standing on the same street where they had stopped him, Mogdal was uncuffed and handed back his belongings with a terse apology. But an apology couldn't erase the scene that had just played out. The humiliation of being detained, the distrust etched into the faces of bystanders, and the chilling awareness that this could have ended far worse. And the officers left, their presence dissipating into the quiet night, but the echoes of their actions remained. Mogdal, a man trained to save lives, now faced a personal crisis: how to process the trauma of being seen as a suspect first and a human second. As news of the incident spread, the community's response was swift. Activists demanded answers, the local news picked up the story, and the police department found itself in the spotlight, forced to address a growing narrative of racial profiling. In Atlanta, the stakes were no less dramatic. For T.I., the turning point came not with the officers, but with the arrival of his attorney. Sitting in a cold, sterile holding room, he watched as the lawyer presented undeniable proof that the man they had detained was not the fugitive they were seeking. The officers, caught between their initial assumptions and irrefutable evidence, had no choice but to release him. Yet the damage was done. The whispers in the terminal, the camera phones capturing every angle, and the headlines that followed ensured that this moment would become a public reckoning. As T.I. walked out of the airport, flanked by his legal team, the questions began to mount. How could such a mistake occur? What safeguards exist to prevent this from happening again? And for T.I., the question was deeply personal. How do you reclaim dignity after being publicly reduced to a suspect? The emotional toll on both men was immeasurable. For Mogdal, the incident reshaped his relationship with the very institutions meant to protect him. He questioned his safety in a city he had called home for years, and wrestled with the reality that his profession, his good intentions, and his humanity hadn't been enough to shield him from prejudice. For T.I., the impact extended beyond himself to his fans, his family, and his brand. He was no longer just a public figure. He was a symbol of how quickly fame and status could be stripped away when assumptions take precedence over facts. And what of the law enforcement agencies involved? In Rochester, public outcry led to a series of town hall meetings where residents voiced their frustrations and fears. The police department pledged to increase training on implicit bias, but the community remained skeptical. For them, this wasn't just about one man. It was about a pattern, a system that seemed to operate on the premise that guilt is assumed based on appearance. In Atlanta, the fallout was equally intense. T.I. didn't let the incident fade into obscurity. He spoke out, using his platform to highlight the broader implications of his experience. Legal experts weighed in, pointing to flaws in the system that allowed such errors to occur. The airport police faced a barrage of criticism not only for their actions but for their lack of transparency in the aftermath. As we reflect on these turning points, it's impossible to ignore the broader questions they raise. How often do we, as a society, rely on assumptions? How many lives have been disrupted by moments of mistaken identity? And how can systems be reformed to ensure that such incidents are not only rare, but impossible? The aftermath of these events wasn't just about individual accountability. It was about systemic change. In Rochester, the police department implemented new policies, including mandatory body camera use and a review of stop and search procedures. For Magdal, these changes were a small victory, though they came at a significant personal cost. In Atlanta, T.I.'s legal team pushed for a formal apology and policy revisions, highlighting the need for better coordination between local law enforcement and national databases. But beyond policies and apologies, the lessons from these stories run deeper. They remind us of the dangers of acting on incomplete information and the human cost of such mistakes. They challenge us to think about the value of empathy, the importance of diligence, and the need for accountability at every level of authority. As we close this chapter, let us carry forward the central message that behind every badge and every assumption lies a responsibility to seek truth, to act justly, and to ensure that mistakes, when they occur, are met not with excuses, but with meaningful change. And so, the stories of Atur Mongol and T.I. are not just stories of what went wrong. They are calls to action, reminders that in a world where judgment can come in an instant, it is our shared duty to ensure that those judgments are rooted in fairness, respect, and truth. Stay with us for more stories like these, where appearances are questioned, truths are uncovered, and the lessons learned shape the way forward. Don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts, because these conversations are far from over.